I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, and today my guest is Dana Reynolds, who is also a Unitarian Universalist minister at Michael Servetus Unitarian Society. Hello.
Hi, David.
How are you?
I'm just fine.
Tell me a little bit about your congregation.
Well, Michael Servetus Unitarian is an offshoot of First Unitarian Society. And the founding members of Michael Servetus were also members of First Unitarian Society back in the 60s. And they had a book discussion group in the northern suburbs that was part of First Unitarian Society, and a few other activities as well. And then they decided to form their own church up there when they found a building for rent. And then they actually went and bought that building, and that eventually became our sanctuary.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
So your congregation is kind of the farthest north in the Twin Cities, then?
Yes, in the Twin Cities, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And so you probably get quite a bit of people from outside, because it's also kind of at the edge of the urban.
That's right. We have people coming from great distance, as far as Plymouth to the west, above Elk River, several communities above Elk River, and to the east as far away as Shoreview. So we draw from a wide geographical distance.
So there isn't another Unitarian Universalist congregation until, I guess,
St. Cloud.
St. Cloud. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
All right.
Right.
Well, so you're covering quite a distance, and people are driving in to get the community and to meet up with other free thinkers and like minds.
That's right.
That's
right.
All right. So it started as a reading group then, a book group, and
there was a book group. They also did some cooperative religious education for their children, and they would do that at someone's house while some of the parents then drove to First Unitarian Society. And of course, in that day, they didn't have I-94 to help out or anything. And so it was a longer journey. But they did that, and then they also did the book group back in the early days.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to know that this is a second career for you as a minister, as it
That's right.
is with me. So I'd like to hear just a little bit about how you got to where you are.
Okay. I started in a United Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ affiliated congregation that I grew up in, and actually thought about going into the ministry as a college freshman at the time, because they were insistent about declaring a major, and so I said, well, pre-seminary, because nothing else occurred to me at the time. And it was an idea whose time had not come, and I was more adept at math, and I ended up being a certified public accountant in my first career. And then after a while, after a close to a 20-year career in accounting, then I decided I had been a Unitarian Universalist for about 5 to 7 years, somewhere in that time frame, and I decided to explore seminary, revisit that old idea.
Well, what took you to a Unitarian Universalist group for the first time then? How did you find us?
Right. Well, I had, after my church of my childhood, I then, due to peer pressure from friends and so forth, got involved in an evangelical Christian background, and I did that for a number of years until it sort of wore out for me, and no longer was relevant, I felt, to the reality of my life, and so then there was a time for a couple of years that I was completely apart from any religious community. I didn't really have one to call my own, And my supervisor at the time, I was a financial officer for a not-for-profit organization. The executive director was a Unitarian Universalist, and she invited me to come to her church way back when. So she was instrumental in giving me a context to find a new religious community, for which I am still always grateful.
We don't make very good proselytizers after
We
us.
do not.
It's great that you had someone to tell you about
That's
this.
right. That's right. And it really is about people finding a religious community where there isn't the conformity required or the belief structure required. And that is what I was looking for, though I might not have been able to say it quite that way when she invited me, but I was very grateful that she did.
You know, I find it interesting. I ask people, so I do hear the stories often about how they found Unitarian Universalism. And a fairly consistent pattern that I find is that people will grow up in a kind of, milquetoast Christianity, perhaps. The parents perhaps maybe weren't all that interested in religion.
Right.
They went on Christmas and Easter.
Right.
And that sort of thing. And then the person goes to these much more conservative evangelical Christian groups and then finds that that's not what
Right.
Why do you think that is? We do that. I mean, so many of us do.
I don't know why. I don't know why we do that exactly. I remember growing up in childhood, we were not a very religious home, and both of my parents grew up in fairly non-religious homes as well, which for the day was pretty rare. And they decided that they needed to do something for my sister and myself, and so they did that stereotypical church shopping kind of a thing. And so I think it has to do with experimentation, which is in answer to your question. I think people are trying different things to see what fits, and the more conservative type of a church is the one that claim they have it all together, whereas we're pretty clear that we do not have all the answers, and that we do have struggles, and that we do need to make improvements, but we want to do that together. We want to find our way along together, as opposed to pretending that we have it together, that we have all the answers. So that may be some of it.
Okay, well, yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, that people go searching for the answer.
That's right.
And then when they find some organization that claims to have the answer, it becomes pretty clear to those who think deeply about it that this is probably either not true or not the sole truth.
Or in my case, it was true for a time in my life. Where I was at that particular time, and then life is not static, and it changes, and then it became stale. It was no longer meeting that particular need. So, but then it didn't have anything to lead into by itself. So I was left looking for something different.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought of it that way, that there's a spiritual growth component that is missing from many religious traditions.
That's right.
Because I mean, I guess you realize it early on, and there's the answer, and that's you've got it, and so
right.
Stop.
and you're and it's like you're finished or something.
Yeah. Well, and that's not soul satisfying if
that's right.
And that
that's
or
right.
mentally challenging, and
right.
And as you say, then also life happens to us, and
right.
We're not the same person at 45 that we were when we were 25.
Right.
And,
that's right.
Yeah. Well, how do you explain or talk a little bit about the fact that we as Unitarian Universalists are creedless? And how do we do that? How do we get along with someone who has is finding answers, not maybe has found, but is finding answers in Buddhism, and someone else who's finding answers in Hinduism, and someone else who's finding answers in atheism.
Right.
However do we get along?
Well, it is a challenge, of course, of course, but the sources of all the world's religions are valid in the sense of where we find that they provide some of those answers. So we'll take something from the Sufi poets, we'll take something from Buddhism. If that particular message, that particular thought is that wisdom is relevant for living where we are right now, and that's a part of it. Now, in our sources, you might recall this: the first source of our living tradition says direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures is really the beginning. So in many respects, religion was started, at least in Western civilization, with founders who had some kind of an experience, and either they or their students were attempting to communicate and teach what that experience was to their followers with one degree of success or another. And our tradition has been more that experience is unfolding, and so that we need to continue as a primary source that direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder. And a theologian in Germany in the 19th century by the name of Schleiermacher said that religion must be some intuition of the infinite in the finite, and his whole approach was that intuition is about feeling rather than thinking and acting. And he is called by some the father of modern liberal theology, and was greatly influential on Emerson, Margaret Fuller, Theodore Parker, and the other transcendentalists by which we draw a lot of our inspiration.
So you think, and Schleiermacher perhaps too, that it's experience first, and then is it rationalization after that, or what?
Well, it's experience first, and it is an experience of the universe, of that infinite in our finite lives, and so finite language is always challenged to explain the infinite. And so we, at least if we are being honest about our own experiences, know that when we talk about them, we're only talking about them in part, and that it is not the whole picture, which is why our sources of all of the world's wisdom is important, because that is how it all unfolds. Some of the viewers might be familiar with the work of Joseph Campbell, and Campbell was a guy who traced some of the common themes that these experiences were having in some of these original or aboriginal societies in their religious experience, and it really is not all that different because it's so rooted in human living and human experience.
Okay, so I guess to summarize, I mean, one of the things that makes our tradition unique is that idea that a prophet or an apostle back there somewhere it wasn't the last experience, and then everything from now on is just reading up on the apostle or the prophet, or and somehow being reasonable and reasoning out what that person experienced as our way of doing.
Yes, that's right. So the followers of those religious founders tended to say, well, it was this experience, and that's the end of the story, and you buy into that that divine revelation. Whereas in our tradition, we believe that revelation is not sealed, that it keeps evolving just like human beings are evolving, and therefore new experiences and so forth are ours to have.
Well, and the transcendentalists, I mean, that's what they went to town on, right? Was the
Exactly.
fact that
Yeah.
we are living now.
That's
and,
right.
And we can have our own experiences. We don't have to
That's
see them
right.
through the lens of a prophet or.
Correct. Yeah, it was, Emerson said that our fathers experienced religion based on the sacred books and so forth. And he said, well, why can't we also have new revelation, new experiences as well? And the idea that experience was evolving. Now, a lot of people think that the Transcendentalist was primarily an intellectual, literary kind of movement. It's taught in English Lit, which you would know, they were using a lot of the German Romantics, Schleiermacher and others, to say, no, it's a much more embodied kind of experiential thing. So.
Well, now, if I want to be a transcendentalist today, and I'm sitting at home, whatever would get me out the door into a Unitarian Universalist congregation if I can stay home and have those revelations.
Right. Schleiermacher actually responded to that as well. He said that the experience of religion through intuition and feeling cannot be experienced always by ourselves, and to do it, he said, would be in vain. His words actually is what he said. They would be in vain for someone holding themselves aloof, because we find the ability to intuit and feel the experience of the universe through others, through community, and through love. And if we don't have those experiences as well, those are sort of the horizontal. In other words, you need that horizontal base of other people in order to experience that same vertical. And so to come out of the door into community of people where you are accepted for who you are, and not because of what you believe and so on, that you need to have that. You need to have that affirmation. You need to have that feeling of acceptance. So acceptance and belonging is really what we're talking about.
And it's interesting to me. I mean, we live in a wired world. We live in a world in which I can chat with people on my smartphone.
Yes.
But there's still something about FaceTime, isn't there?
There really is. There really is. And I think that the generations coming on after us get that. And so they do use the electronic media and for connecting and keeping tabs and so forth, but they set up, using those tools, they set up real FaceTime. And you and I both have seen examples of where that happens. It's very, very important. It's either, and it doesn't necessarily always happen in church, but it can. And it happens in the other times when people come together.
Well, yeah, we had one of our young people set up a group on Facebook to get together, and
Exactly.
And she called it, Connect and Reflect, and the Connect was to meet at a place, and
Right.
And to interact and then reflect together, and I find that fascinating that that the more connected we get. Electronically,
Yes.
the more, in some ways, we still need that human interaction.
We absolutely do.
It's
absolutely
a fascinating
do.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
Really.
And as I said, the younger generation is better about doing that, and they have things that we all can learn. How to make that work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking to a gentleman just the other day about our memories of getting our first phone. Both of us had grown up in the country, and first a neighbor has a phone, and the neighbor would drive over and say, "Hey, you got a phone call," and then we knew one of our relatives was dead or something.
Right,
and, and then we got a party line, so that the neighbors listened to all of our phone calls anyway.
Right.
And so it was still in some strange way communal because
yes, that's right.
it was wired up. But now I have my smartphone and I can hide in a corner and no one can hear me except perhaps the government if they're listening. But other than that,
right. And so there will always be a need for religious communities, and the liberal religious community, and liberal just means free. It comes from liberté and liberty, where there is acceptance for people where they are and who they are. We're all part of that interconnected web, and we can't change that. That will always be true, and yet the experience of it in religious community, in an open liberal religious community, is what we are trying to offer as an alternative to that isolation, an alternative to conformity, and some of the other things that we are finding don't work so well.
Well, unlike the folks who live up above Elk River, here in the Twin Cities, we have a lot of variety of Unitarian Universalist congregations. Why do you think that is? I mean, why aren't they all just the same sort of McDonald's franchise? So you walk in and get the same thing.
Well, people who have lived here all their lives will tell you about cultural differences even between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so we have congregations on each side of the river in the Twin Cities area. And they have different histories, of course. And so some of them came out of the Unitarian tradition. Back in the 19th century, there were Universalist churches here before our merger in 1961, and so they had different flavors. So that's one significant explanation for how they are each have their own uniqueness. And I think where they're located also makes a big difference as well. And people frequently, like our Michael Servetus Unitarian, evolved out of First Unitarian Society. And there is some of that replication that's going on as well, where the longer established congregations have spawned new ones.
So probably we're safe to say that those that are Unitarian are more rationalist often.
That would be one way to think about it.
And those that are Universalist in their DNA are, well, what is the difference?
Well, I always like to say that traditionally Unitarianism was the belief that God is one, and Universalist was the belief that all people are able to partake in salvation. And so today, those two things may not mean as much in the traditional way, but I think about them as Unitarians is sort of the understanding that the sacred, the divine, however named, is a wholeness, wholeness not divided, and universalism means that everyone is able to be a partaker of that sacred wholeness.
Well, and to be clear to our listeners who perhaps don't know about this, that we did merge
That's right.
in 1961. And
That's
so
right.
even though there is a First Universalist Church, it is Unitarian Universalist now.
That's right.
And even though
That's
there is
right.
a First Unitarian, it is Unitarian Universalist now.
That's right.
And so even though there's a DNA back there and a history that we share a common set of beliefs nowadays in terms of, well, acceptance for one thing of religious diversity.
Right, right. And in fact, even before the merger, there was a lot of mutual cooperation between what was then the Unitarians and the Universalist Church in America. They did a lot of things together, publications and so on.
So if I'm church shopping,
yeah,
I probably just, number one, should look at some websites and, and think a little bit about it, and maybe just show up. And another thing about Unitarian Universalist services, they're different Sundays, aren't they? So
they are.
If
they
I
are
just
different.
show up at your church one day and it's all music, that doesn't mean it's always just all music.
That's right. That's right. Yesterday, you would appreciate this. I did 2 readings that were, and talked about those readings that were both poems, fairly well-known poems, and yet there would be a Sunday in which there would be several music things going all the way through. So
okay.
yeah.
So that we need to visit several, maybe, rather than just, and then go on a few times. And also, I mean, reflect a little bit on the difference between larger and smaller congregations in terms of, I don't know, my own,
Sure. My congregation is a fairly small, small congregation by Twin Cities metro standards. First Unitarian Society, I would consider to be in the medium to large size, and there are, all of those are there, and the Unitarian Universalist Association website, you can search for a congregation, put in Minnesota, and see all the flag pins and see what that concentration is. And it gives you a sense of at least geography, and then if you dig into that detail a little bit, also a little bit about size and so forth. It's really the size of the membership as opposed to what the attendance might be, which is not necessarily the same thing, but it gives you a sense of variety there.
And it boils down to personality, doesn't it?
It does.
If I'm a person who wants to be engaged and volunteer a lot, and everyone know my name like at Cheers, then probably a smaller congregation is for me.
Right.
Whereas maybe if I'm a little bit interior and a little bit shy, maybe I want to go somewhere where maybe I can be there for
sit in the balcony
quite
or something.
some time without anyone even knowing my name.
Right.
So that. Yeah, we can meet. It's great that we can meet that because again, those people north of Elk River and Unitarian Universalist congregations are not thickly spread across America.
We are not, and so there needs to be outreach. There needs to be internet, electronic connection, any way that we can find to do that.
And there is a thing called the Church of the Larger Fellowship,
that's
CLF, that does
that's right.
Reach out to people electronically and by mail for someone who may be in North Dakota, South Dakota, where you're maybe 3 hours from your nearest Unitarian Universalist congregation.
That's right.
Dana, it has been great talking with you today.
Good talking with you. I enjoyed it.
Great insights. Always love to hear some reflections on liberal religion and just kind of to clarify thinking a little bit about these important issues. Thank you so much. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis. Have a great day.